These are the best settings for your mic in OBS, including how I EQ mine. So you want to right click your mic and click on filters. You then want to add a gain, noise suppression, including how I EQ mine. So you want to right click your mic and click on filters. You then want to These are the best settings for your mic in OBS, including how I EQ mine. So you want to right click your mic and click on filters. You then want to add a gain, noise suppression, including how I EQ mine. So you want to right click your mic and click on filters. You then want to
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? I think it's working. So it's okay. So now let's go back to our stream. Okay. Let's at first dive deeper into who was Jane Austen. According to Wikipedia, Jane Austen, 16 December 75, was an English novelist known primarily for her sex novels, which blithely interpret, critic, critique, and comment upon the British landed gentry. At the end of the 18th century, Austen's blogs often explored the dependence of women on marriage for the pursuit of favorable social standing and economic security. Her works are an implicit critique of the novels of sensibility of the second half of the 18th century and are part of the transitions to 19th century realism. Here the hues of social commentary, realism, and biting irony have earned a acclaim among critics and scholars. So, the published Sense and Sensibilities, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Emma were a modest success, but brought her little fame in her lifetime. Actually, I remember reading that Pride and Prejudice were just like written to entertain her family, and this is really interesting because she didn't intend to write it in order to be so famous just for fun. And this is the essence of everything, you know? So apparently this is a portrait of Jane Austen. Wow, she died so young. 41. And this is her signature. I love signatures. They're often so unique. See how she draws the M, combine it with the E and T. So beautiful. Let's go back to Pride and Prejudice. According to what I already understood from the first 16 chapters, 15 actually, the novel itself surrounds one idea. Elizabeth's mother wants her daughters to get married. For many reasons. One, she's afraid one day the parents won't be here and the property money will go to any of their mas- to any of her masculine relatives, and also because this is what she thinks a woman should do, which is not right, but according to the novel, this is what Mrs. Bennet thought at the moment. The first few chapters rounds on Mr. Bingley visiting the town, having few balls over. Jane got Mr. Bingley's eye for her beauty and kindness. Mr. Darcy is a total jerk. He is an ass. Sorry for the word. I can't forget when he called Elizabeth. She is tolerable. Just tolerable. So uncomfortable. I actually, till this moment, can't understand the hype behind Mr. Darcy. Like, let's go to Pinterest and let's type Mr. Darcy and see what we might get. It's crazy. His population is scary. Look, it's mostly the movie adaptations, but people like him so much. And I'm now in chapter 16, and I cannot get it. Like, he's totally depressing, probably more than Edward from Twilight, but he's rich, and maybe that's enough for them. I'm looking forward actually to watch the TV adaptation. I don't know what's his name, but I heard lots of positive reviews on the TV show. So let's see if someone is here. If you are here, tape anything. If you have any recommendation, say them. I'll be glad. So till I catch anyone's eye, because I'm so bored tonight, let's play some public domain music. This is country music called Memories of a Friend by Gary Straisbach. Did I pronounce it right? Straisbach? Wait. This is totally insane and I'm really enjoying it.
Strasbourg.
Strasbach. Strasbach. Gary Strasbach.
Gary Strasbourg.
Gary Strasbach. Wow. Who's Gary Strasbach? So he's on SoundCloud. Daddy's word, that's weird, that's father's song. Wait. Probably uses him, and he has few tracks on YouTube as well. What are we doing right now? We are exploring Gary Strasbach. I'm not sure if this is the singer, but probably that's him. He's from Phoenix, United States. Interesting. Maybe let's search him with the song Memories of a Friend, Gary Strasbach. It's really interesting. I can't find anything about him at the moment. But let's play the song. Wow, this is not country. This is a bossa nova blues. This is bossa nova and jazz. Greetings and welcome back for what a beautiful sunset. This is really pretty interesting. In the middle of it, I think I heard some whispers. That's pretty unique, you know? It feels like supplement videos. I actually hear that supplement videos aren't really the best for us because they like inject messages to our own subconsciousness mind and you don't know really what are you hearing. So don't trust the person. You are cooked for real. Back to chapter 16 and our own main goal of today's life, which is also my first life ever. I'm so excited. Apparently, the last chapter ended with Jane and her sisters going to the market with Mr. Collins, meeting Mrs. Phillips, and crossing by Bingley and Darcy. Chapter 16. As no objection was made to the young people's engagement with their aunt, and all Mr. Collins' scruples of leaving Mr. and Mrs. Bennet for a single evening during his visit were most stoutly resisted. The coach invited him and his 5 cousins for a suitable hour to Merton, and the girls had the pleasure of hearing as they entered the drawing room that Mr. Wickham had accepted their uncle's invitation and was then in the house. Remind me who was Mr. Wickham? That's Mr. Wickham. So George Wickham is a fictional character created by Jane Austen, who appears in her novel. He is introduced as militia officer who has a shared history with Mr. Darcy. Wickham charming and his story of being badly treated by Darcy attracts the sympathy of the heroine, Elizabeth Bennet. Again, Elizabeth trying to see the darkness in Mr. Darcy. When this information was given, and they had all taken their seats, Mr. Collins was at the leisure to look around him and admire, and he was so much struck with the size and furniture of the apartment that he declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlour at Rosings. Conversion that did not at first imply much gratification, but when Mrs. Phillips understood from him what Rosings was and who was its proprietor, when she had listened to the description of only one of Lady Catherine's drawing rooms, and found that the chimney piece alone had cost £800, she felt all the force of the compliment. She would hardly have resented a comparison with the housekeeper's room. In describing to me all the grandeur of Lady Catherine and her mansion, his occasional visions in praise of his own humble abode and the improvements it was receiving, he was happily employed until a gentleman joined him, and he found in Mrs. Phillips a very attentive listener, whose opinion of his consequences increased as what she heard, and who was resolving to retail it all among her neighbors as soon as she could. To the girls who could not listen to their cousin, and who had nothing to do but to wish for an instrument and examine their own indifferent imitations of China on the mantelpiece. The interval of waiting appeared very long. It was over at last, however. The gentleman did approach, and when Mr. Wickham walked into the room, Elizabeth felt that she had neither been seen him before, nor thinking of him since with the smallest degree of unreasonable admiration. The officers of the shire were in general a very creditable, gentlemanlike set, and the best of them were of the present party. But Mr. Wickham was as far beyond them all in person, countenance, air, and walk, as they were superior to the broad-faced, stuffy Uncle Phillips, feeding port wine, who followed them into the room. Wait a minute. So, Elizabeth didn't think that Wickham is like all the other officers you have seen? Time to go to ChatGPT. I always like to say hi to my ChatGPT. It's alright, dude. How's it going? Oh, so I have been reading Pride and Prejudice, and I want to ask you about something in chapter 16. See Elizabeth. Felt like Mr. Wickham isn't like the other. Oops. Why so? Who would name their child as Wickham? Like Wicked? That's crazy. Oh, Elizabeth's skepticism about Mr. Wickham compared to the other officers stems from Wickham's charm and apparent gentlemanly demeanor. Demeanor. What this mean? So,
demeanor,
demeanor means outward behavior appearing, which contrasts sharply with the more typical behavior of officers she has encountered. His affability and seeming integrity make him stand out, creating a contrast to less favorable impressions she has of other military men. Hmm. So he's late. That's interesting, Elizabeth. Back to chapter 16. Mr. Wickham was the happy man towards whom almost every female eye was turned, and Elizabeth was the happy woman by whom he finally seated himself, and the agreeable manner in which he immediately fell into conversation, though it was only on its being a wet night, made her feel that the commonest, dullest, most suitable topic might be rendered interesting by the skill of the speaker. With such rivals for the notice of the fair as Mr. Wickham and the officers, Mr. Collins seemed to sink into insignificance. To the young ladies he certainly was nothing, but he had still, at intervals, a kind listener in Mrs. Phillips, and was by her watchfulness most abundantly, had the opportunity of obliging her in turn. I need to know what have those words.
Obliging.
Obliging. So when the card tables were placed, he had the opportunity of obliging her in turn by sitting down to whist. I know little of the game at present, said he, but I shall be glad to improve myself, for in my situation in life Mrs. Phelps was very glad for his compliance, but could not wait for his reason. Mr. Wickham did not play at whist, and with very delight was he received at the other table between Elizabeth and Lydia. So whist is a trick-taking game, classic English trick-taking card game. I think I know it. I'm not really good with games. It reminds me of Domino though. Anyway, Mr. Wickham did not play at whist, and was witty delight was he received at the other table between Elizabeth and Lydia. At first there seemed danger of Lydia's engrossing him entirely, for she was a most determined talker, but being likewise extremely fond of lottery tickets, she soon grew too much interested in the game, too eager in making bets and exclaiming after prizes, to have attention for anyone in particular, allowing for the common demands of the game. Mr. Wickham was therefore at leisure to talk to Elizabeth. Oh, fancy! And she was very willing to hear him. Oh, she got the bait. Though what she chiefly wished to hear she could not hope to be told. Wow, this is so wise. She chiefly wished to hear she could not hope to be told. The history of his acquaintance with Mr. Darcy, she dared not even mention that gentleman. Her curiosity, however, was unexpectedly relieved. Mr. Wickham began the subject himself. Epic. That's more epic than Damon and Stephen epic. He inquired how far Netherfield was from Merton, and after receiving her answer, asked in a hesitating manner how long Mr. Darcy had been staying there. "About a month," said Elizabeth, and then unwillingly, to let the subject drop, added, "He is a man of a very large property in Derbyshire, like out of Darcy? Derby? Derbyshire? That's so bad for a name. Thumbs down." "I understand. Yes," replied Mr. Wickham. "His estate there is a noble one, a clear 10,000 per annum. You could not have met with a person more capable of giving you certain information on that head than myself, for I have been connected with his family in a particular manner from my infancy." Elizabeth could not but look surprised. "You may well be surprised, Miss Bennet, at such an assertion after seeing, as you probably might, the very cold manner of our meeting yesterday. Are you much acquainted with Mr. Darcy?" "Oh, you got it." "As much as I ever wish to be," cried Elizabeth, very warmly. "I have spent 4 days in the same house with him, and I think him very disagreeable." "I have no right to give my opinion," said Wickham, "as to his being agreeable or otherwise. I am not qualified to form one. I have known him too long and too well to be a fair judge. It is impossible for me to be impartial, but I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish, and perhaps you would not express it quite so strongly anywhere else. Here you are in your own family. Greetings, Princess Vampire. Great nickname, by the way. I actually have the book as a hardcover. It's my sister's book, but I prefer reading it in PDF version instead, as I have to look for the translations from time to time, go to ChatGPT, etc. Thank you. Let's go back to reading. Upon my word, I say no more. Here than I might say in any house in the neighborhood, except Netherfield. He is not at all liked in Hertfordshire. Everybody is disgusted with his pride. You will not find him more favourably spoken of by anyone. I cannot pretend to be sorry, said Wickham, after a short interpretation, that he or that any man should not be estimated beyond their deserts. But with him, I believe it does not often happen. The world is blinded by his fortune, and consequence or frightened by his high and imposing manners, and sees him only as he chooses to be seen. I should take him, even on my slight acquaintance, to be an ill-tempered man. Wickham only shook his head. Well, looks like he has got a really big beef with Mr. Darcy. I wonder, said he, at the next opportunity of speaking, whether he is likely to be in this country much longer. I do not at all know, but I heard nothing of his going away when I was in Netherfield. I hope your plans in favour of the Shire will not be affected by his being in the neighbourhood. Oh no, it's not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he wishes to avoid seeing me, he must go. We are not on friendly terms, and it always gives me pain to meet him, but I have no reason for avoiding him. But what I might proclaim before all the world, a sense of very great ill usage, and most painfully regrets at his being what he is. His father, Miss Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the best men that ever breathed, and the truest friend I ever had. And I can never be in company with this Mr. Darcy, without being grieved to the soul by a thousand tender recollections. His behaviour to myself has been scandalous, but I verily believe I could forgive him anything and everything, rather than his disappointing the hopes and disgrace the memory of his father. Elizabeth found the interest of the subject increased and listened with all her heart, but the delicacy of it prevented further inquiry. Mr. Wickham began to speak on more general topics, medicine, the neighbourhood, society, being highly really interesting. Cool. It was the prospect of constant society and good society, he added, which was my chief inducement to enter the Shire. I know it be it I know it to be a most respectable, agreeable course, and my friend then tempted me further by his account of their present quarters, and the very great attentions and excellent acquaintances Meryton had procured them. Society, I own, is necessary to me. I have been a disappointed man, and my spirits will not bear solitude. I must have employment and society. A military life is not what I was intended for, but circumstances have now made it eligible. The charge ought to have been my profession. I was brought, I was brought up for the charge, the church, and I should at this time have been in possession of a most valuable living, had it pleased the gentleman we were speaking of just now. Indeed, yes, the late Mr. Darcy requested me to the next presentation of the best living in his gift. He was my godfather, and excessively attached to me. I cannot do justice to his kindness. He meant to provide for me amply, and though he had done it, but when the living fell, it was given elsewhere. Good heavens! cried Elizabeth. But how could that be? How could this how could his will be disregarded? Why did you not seek legal redress? Redress. There was just such an informality in the terms of the bequest as to the intention, but Mr. Darcy chose to doubt it, or to treat it as a merely conditional recommendation, and to assert that I had forfeited all claim to it by extravagances, extravagances, extrava- does this come from revenge? An instance of excess or prodigality. Prodigality. That's really interesting. Imprudence. In short, anything or nothing. Certain it is that the living became vacant 2 years ago, exactly as I was of an age to hold it, and that it was given to another man, and no less certain is it that I cannot accuse myself of having really done anything to deserve to lose it. I have a warm, unguarded temper, and I may have spoken my opinion of him hand to hand too freely. I can recall nothing worse, but the fact is that we are very different sort of men, and that he hates me. This is quite shocking. He deserves to be publicly disgraced. Sometime or other he will be, but it shall not be by me. Till I can forget his father, I can never defy or expose him. Elizabeth honored him for such feelings, and thought him handsomer than ever as he expressed them. But what, said she, after a pause, can have been his motive? What can have induced him to behave so cruelly? I actually respect Elizabeth's reply. She didn't just hear Mr. Wickham and like, this is the reality. Her critical thinking is really interesting, at so far, while she is so angry with Mr. Darcy. A true determined dislike of me, a dislike which I cannot but attribute in some measure to jealousy. Had the late Mr. Darcy liked me less, his son might have torn with me better, but his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him. I believe very early in life he had not a temper to bear the sort of competition in which we stood, the sort of preferences which was often given to me. I had not thought Mr. Darcy so bad at this, though I have never liked him. I had not thought so very ill of him. I had supposed him to be despising his fellow creatures in general, but did not suspect him of descending to such malicious revenge, such injustice, such inhumanity as this. Actually, this scene reminds me of Godfather. Remember the Godfather? I actually remember it. I loved it at some point. Remember that the lawyer they had, what was his name? Wait, he was the Santini guy. Oh, Robert Duvall. Remember he played the lawyer for the family, the Godfather adopted him, and he was so clever, probably more than his entire kids. But then he was mistreated by Al Pacino, Michael Corleone. That reminds me of the whole thing. But back to the story. I had not thought Mr. Darcy so bad at this. Though I have never liked him, I had not thought so very ill of him. I had supposed him to be despising his fellow creatures in general, but did not suspect him of descending to such malicious revenge, such injustice, and such inhumanity as this. After a few minutes' reflection, however, she continued, I do remember his boasting one day at Netherfield, or of the implacability of his resentments, of his having unforgiving temper. His disposition must be dreadful. I will not trust myself on this subject, replied Wickham. I can hardly be just to him. Elizabeth was again deep in thought, and after a time exclaimed, to treat in such a manner the godson, the friend, the favourite of his father. She could have added, a young man, too, like you, whose very countenance may vouch for your being Mabel, but she contented herself with, and one, too, who had probably been his companion from childhood, connected together, as I think you say, in the closest manner. I will not trust myself on this subject, replied Wickham. I can hardly be just to him. Elizabeth was again deep in thought, and after a time exclaimed, to treat in such a manner the godson, the friend, the favourite of his father, she could have added, a young man too, acute, whose very countenance may vouch for your being a Mabel. But she contented himself with, and one too, who had probably been his companion from childhood, connected together, as I think you said, in the closest manner. This brings back to the whole Godfather scenario. Also, James Caan, who played Sonny, mistreated Duval a lot. It's really crazy. I think that the whole Godfather is inspired by Jane Austen. And people might not believe me, but this is a fact that I just discovered with you. We were born in the same parish, within the same park. The greatest, the greatest part of our youth was passed together, inmates of the same house, sharing the same amusements, objects of the same parental care. My father began life in the profession which your uncle, Mr. Phillips, appears to do so much credit to, but he gave up everything to be of use to the late Mr. Darcy, and devoted all his time to the care of the Pimperley property. He was most highly esteemed by Mr. Darcy, a most intimate, confidential friend. Mr. Darcy often acknowledged himself to be under the greatest obligations to my father's active superintendence. Wait, let's check how to pronounce this word. Superintendence?
superintendence,
Superintendence. That's interesting. Superintendence, and when immediately before my father's death Mr. Darcy gave him a voluntary promise of providing for me. I am convinced that he felt it to be as much a debt of gratitude to him as of his affection to myself. How strange, cried Elizabeth. How abominable. I wonder that the very pride of this Mr. Darcy has not made him just to you, if from no better motive, that he should not have been too proud to be dishonest. From dishonesty I must call it. It's wonderful, replied Wickham, for almost all his actions may be traced to pride, and pride had often been his best friend. It has connected him nearer with virtue than with any other feeling. But we are none of us consistent, and in his behavior to me there were stronger impulses even than pride. Can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good? Yes, it has often led him to be liberal and generous, to give his money freely, to display hospitality, to assist his tenants and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride, for he is very proud of what his father was, have done this, not to appear to disgrace his family, to degenerate from the popular qualities, or lose the influence of the Pemberley house as a powerful motive. He has also brotherly pride, which, with some brotherly affection, makes him a very kind and careful guardian of his sister, and you will hear him generally cried up as the most attentive and the best of brothers. What sort of girl is Miss Darcy? What sort of girl is Mr. Darcy? What sort of girl is Miss Darcy? He shook his head. I wish I could call her a Mabel. It gives me pain to speak ill of a Darcy, but she. What? It gives me pain to speak ill of a Darcy? You literally ruined the whole family pictures for a total stranger. Actually, I started to think that Mr. Wickham is so mean. Like, do you remember Mean Girls? Movie time? Not the new one. I haven't seen the new one. I mean the old one. Remember? Wait. I know I have problems with names, but I remember at the end of the movie when Lizzie, who played Janice, said to Katie that you are the real villain. You act like you are so superior and so kind, and everyone just mistreats you, that you are the villain and not Regina. This is a very familiar situation to me. Like, this Wickham is really crying for not being included in the family after the father has died, and it's really a very bad thing for him. But the way he talks about his children and then says, "Oh no, I cannot dare to talk bad about Darcy," that you have already done, is so mean. Anyway, back. He shook his head. I wish I could call her Mabel. It gives me pain to speak ill of Darcy, but she is too much like her brother, very, very proud. As a child, she was affectionate and pleasing and extremely fond of me, and I have devoted hours and hours to her amusement. But she is nothing to me now. She is a handsome girl, about 15 or 16, and I understand highly accomplished since her father's death, and whom has been London, where a lady lives with her and super, superintends her superintends her education. He's also hurt, actually, like including few people as very close people to you, like Mr. Darcy and his sister, and then suddenly they are total strangers. That's really sad, by the way. After many pauses and many trials of other subjects, Elizabeth could not help reverting once more to the first and saying, "I am astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. How can Mr. Bingley, who seems got humour itself, and is, I really believe, truly enabled, be in friendship with such a man? How can they suit each other? Do you know Mr. Bingley? Not at all. He's a sweet-tempered, amiable, charming man. You cannot know what Mr. Darcy is." "Probably not, but Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses. He does not want abilities. He can be a conversible companion if he thinks it's worth his while, among those who are at all his equals in consequence. He is a very different man from what he is to the less prosperous. His pride never deserts him, but with the rich he is liberal-minded, just, sincere, rational, honorable, and perhaps agreeable, allowing something for fortune and figure. The whist party soon afterwards breaking up, the players gathered round the other table and Mr. Collins took his station between his cousin Elizabeth and Mrs. Phillips. The usual inquiries as to his success was made by the latter. It had not been very great. He had lost every point. But when Mrs. Phillips began to express her conquer, thereupon he assured her with much earnest gravity that it was not of the least importance, that he considered the money as a mere trifle, and begged that she would not make herself uneasy. That actually line makes you wonder what he could have done with the Bennet's money. Like, I know that Mrs. Bennet has already like £4,000, and Mr. Bennet has the land. Wow, he probably would just use everything into gambling. I just don't trust him. I think all the men in this novel so weird. Like, Mr. Collins did have a crush on Jane at the beginning, but when Miss Bennet told him that Jane might be getting married to Mr. Bingley, he just switched his eyes to Miss Elizabeth. It's so weird, like, just in a blink of an eye, Jane Elizabeth. That shows a lot about the man. I know very well, ma'am, said he, that when persons sit down to a card table they must take their chances of these things, and happily I am not in such circumstances as to make 5 shillings any object. There are undoubtedly many who could not say the same, but thanks to Lady Catherine de Bourgh, I am removed far beyond the necessity of regarding little matters. Mr. Wickham's attention was caught, and after observing Mr. Collins for a few moments, he asked Elizabeth in a low voice whether her relation was very intimately acquainted with the family of the Brough. Lady Catherine de Bourgh's shoe blade has very lately given him a living. I hardly know how Mr. Collins was first introduced to her notice, but he certainly has not known her long. You know, of course, that Lady Catherine and Lady Anne Darcy were sisters. Consequently, that she is aunt to the present Mr. Darcy? No, indeed, I did not. I knew nothing at all of Lady Catherine's connections. I never heard of her existence till the day before yesterday. Her daughter, Miss de Bourgh, will have a very large fortune, and it's believed that she and her cousin will unite the two estates. The information made Elizabeth smile as she thought of poor Miss Bingley. Vain indeed must be all her attentions, vain and useless her affection for his sister, and her praise of himself if he were already self-destined for another. Mr. Collins, said she, speaks highly both of Lady Catherine and her daughter, but from some particulars that he has related of her ladyship, I suspect his gratitude misleads him, and that in spite of her being his patroness, she is an arrogant, conceited woman, while everybody talks bad in everybody's back. I believe her to be false in a great degree, replied Wickham. I have not seen her for many years, but I very well remember that I have never liked her, and that her manners were dictatorial and insolent. Wow, she has the reputation of being remarkably sensible and clever, but I rather believe she derives part of her abilities from her rank and fortune, part from her assertive manner, and the rest from the pride for her nephew, who chooses that everyone connected with him should have an understanding of the first class. Wow. Elizabeth allowed that he had given a very rational account of it, and they continued talking together with mutual satisfaction. To supper put an end to cards, and gave the rest of the ladies their share of Mr. Wickham's attentions. There could be no conversation in the noise of Mrs. Phillips's supper party, but his manners recommended him to everybody. Whatever he said was said well, and whatever he did, done gracefully. Elizabeth went away with her head full of him. She could not think of nothing but of Mr. Wickham, and of what he had told her all the way home, but there was not time for her even to mention his name as they went, for neither Lydia nor Mr. Collins were once silent. Lydia talked incessantly of lottery tickets, of the fish she had lost, and the fish she had won, and Mr. Collins in describing the civility of Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, protesting that he did not in the least regard his losses at West, enumerating, enumerating all the dishes at supper, and repeatedly fearing that he crowded his cousins, had more to say than he could well manage before the carriage stopped at Longthorn House. End of chapter 16. Now it's the analysis time. So let's see what does the internet thinks of chapter 16 of Pride and Prejudice. Hmm. So according to this site called shmoop.com, it's just a summary, no analysis. The next evening, Mr. Collins and the girls go to Philip's house for a dinner party. Mr. Wickham sits beside Elizabeth at dinner, and they really hit it off. Wow, I like how they talk as if they were describing a Gen Z movie. Lydia has her eye on him too, but the game of whist ends up being more attractive for the moment. Mr. Wickham explains that he has known the Darcy family since he was a baby. What? Elizabeth says that Darcy isn't too popular in these parts, and Wickham basically says, "Can you keep a secret?" Well, obviously, here's the gossip. Wickham hasn't brought it up to be in the military or even to have a job at all, but circumstances now dictate that he must. In another way, he was supposed to be a gentleman, meaning that he didn't have to work for a living. Third men were gentlemen too, sure. They technically had jobs, but most of them didn't work very hard. They left all that to the curators. Wow, let's search this word.
Curate.
Curate, a member of the clergy, engaged as assistant to a vizier or parish priest. So Wickham was supposed to be a clergyman, and Mr. Darcy's father promised him the living on the Darcy estate. Quick brainstem. The living of an estate was the charge on an estate. Every major estate would have one, and some would have multiple. Wickham says that the elder Mr. Darcy promised him the next presentation of the best living in his gift, which implies that he had more than one, and an estate owner could give the living to whoever he wants. Usually, it went to some sort of family member. Anyway, the younger Mr. Darcy did not honor the request, for reasons Wickham cannot explain. According to Wickham, Darcy hates him. Oh, says Elizabeth. Somebody should expose Mr. Darcy for the awful man that he is. Yeah, they should call the cancel culture on him. Mr. Wickham won't do it. He has too much respect for the senior Mr. Darcy, obviously. But Darcy's sister is just as bad as his brother, as her brother. So why does Mr. Bingley like him so much? Maybe he doesn't know the truth. Mr. Wickham says Mr. Darcy can please people if he tries. And by the way, Lady Catherine is Mr. Darcy's aunt. Wickham says that Mr. Darcy will marry Lady Catherine's daughter so that they can merge the two states together. Anyway, Lizzie wrote a letter thinking about how Miss Bingley keeps making on Mr. Darcy, and it looks like someone is developing a little crush on Wickham. Wow, this site really tells it very funny. So let's go to ChatGPT. Hey ChatGPT, what are your thoughts on chapter 16 of Pride and Prejudice? So, chapter 16 is quite the ride. It's where Elizabeth starts questioning him sanely to say it. Thanks to some gossip from Mr. Darcy Austen's. Wow, this is something wrong here. Austen's boastful and weeping in these little seeds of doubt early on juicy conflicts and keeps you wondering who is really who. He's so sure whether. There's something wrong here. They say that Elizabeth starts questioning Mr. Wickham's sanity. They say they replaced Mr. Darcy actually with Mr. Wickham. Oh, no. Sure. One thing. Wait, it's not on. Oh, this is a note of me trying to summarize the book. There's two chapters. I think that chat should definitely and my computer might go off. Meanwhile, that should be end of the stream. I just have to pick a song from the public domain library. City Lights. This might sound good, I don't know. Let's try it.